Um sorriso rasgado. Bem-vindos, caros amigos da Livraria Lello, caros leitores. Hoje é um dia muito especial. Todos os dias nesta casa são especiais, mas alguns são um bocadinho mais especiais. Este, para mim, é um bocadinho mais especial. Porque, de facto, hoje temos o prazer, a honra de receber David Grossman e não é todos os dias que temos, de facto, essa possibilidade de ter um autor tão do mundo entre nós. Só para dizer que estou feliz por vos ver cá, estou feliz por estar cá, David Grossman. Thank you, David, for accepting our invitation and sharing this moment with us. Vai ser sabiamente conduzido pelo jornalista Valdemar Cruz. Obrigada, Valdemar, também. E um agradecimento também à Cecília Andrade e à Diana Monsanto da Don Quixote, porque é claro que sem a boa vontade e o esforço delas também não estaríamos a viver este momento tão encantador. Obrigada por terem vindo e deixo-vos, que é isso que importa, ser guiados comigo pelas mãos aqui de Valdemar Cruz, numa viagem que nos levará até David Grossman. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bem, boa noite a todos, espero que estejam a ouvir bem. Eu vou começar por falar em português, de uma breve introdução, mas depois a conversa será conduzida em inglês. Creio que David Grossman dispensa apresentações. É um autor premiadíssimo, extremamente conceituado, com grandes livros, que de resto estão aqui alguns deles presentes. E eu vou então iniciar a conversa. David, I made just a small presentation. We are here in a beautiful bookshop. You have been told the story of this bookshop. I'm curious to know what's your relation with bookshops, libraries, and how important are they?
First of all, Shalom, good evening. Shabbat Shalom, it's Sabbath, the evening of Sabbath today, Friday. And thank you, Aurora, for inviting me here to this beautiful shop. It's not a shop, it's more than that, I don't know how to describe it.
It's a temple. A temple.
A temple, okay. No, I think you are right in a way, because the more the world becomes not understandable, unpredictable, and violent, we, people of the world, people of the letter, need such places in order to feel protected even, and to feel that they are in their natural place. And this place, with the beauty of it, really, with the radiation of so many books and ideas, I feel at home. To your question, I feel at home, yeah.
Every book tells a story, but every book has a story behind it. Would you share with us some stories that were behind the making of some of these books?
Okay.
Maybe this one for
this one is with, to the end of the land.
Yes.
Yeah. But maybe I'll start with my latest book, Life Plays With Me, or What Nina Knew, I think.
This one.
Yeah. And it started one day with a phone call to my home. And there was a voice of a woman, very decisive, very self-confident. And she was criticizing me for an article that I wrote in one of our papers. She felt it was not sharp enough against the settlers. And I explained her my opinion, and she explained me her opinion. And I started to feel that she's a very unusual, very unique human being. Now, every human being is unique, but she was uniquer in a way. And I asked her, I said, I hear a special accent in your words. Where do you come from? Because Israel is a country of immigrants. And she said that she comes from a little town in Croatia, Čakovec, and that her accent is a mixture of Hebrew, of Croatian, of Hungarian. And I asked her, can you tell me something about your family, where you were born to? And she started to tell me the story that turned out to be one of the most unpredictable story that I have ever heard. But when she got to a place in the story that was really full of tension and meanings, she suddenly cut it brutally. And she said, I don't want to bother you or to bore you with my little stories, but maybe in the future, sometimes you allow me to call you again. And I said, yes, please do. Don't hesitate. Please call. And I think 2-3 days later, the future came and she continued to tell me her story. And again, it was really unbelievable story, so extreme, so exposed. And again, when she reached a kind of a crucial stone, she said, but I don't want to bore you with my stupid little anecdotes, but may I call you in the future? But by then I understood her trick, the trick of Scheherazade, you know, that all the time she wanted to keep me alert and attracted to her. And I said, no, Eva. Her name was Eva Panichna here. Now you are telling me the whole story. And she started to tell me the whole story, and she told me the whole story for the next 20 years. We became friends. We spoke a lot off the phone. We met whenever she came to Jerusalem, my hometown. She was 77 when we first met, and she was 97 when she died 20 years later. And as I said, she was the most unique human being I've ever met, and her story was really hard to believe. But I don't want to bother you with my little story. So when she was in Croatia in the time of big Yugoslavia led by Marshal Tito, she fell in love with a Serbian officer, a non-Jewish Serbian officer. She was Jewish. And they had the most extreme love story that I've ever heard. And they had a daughter. And at a certain point, Marshal Tito started to suspect that she and her husband are agents of Stalin. And he started to interrogate and to torture the husband. And the husband committed suicide. And she was left alone. Eva Panichna was left alone with the daughter. Her name was Tiana, the name of the daughter. And at a certain point, the commanders of the UDBA, the secret service of Marshal Tito, came and arrested her and tortured her and forced her to declare that her husband was a spy in favor of Stalin. And she refused to tell that. And the interrogators told her, listen, you have now two choices. One, that you declare that your husband was a spy and an enemy of the people. And if you are doing that, you are being released from this room in a second, and you take your daughter Tiana back home, and nothing will happen to you. Only tomorrow there will be in some of the papers the note that Eva Panic has discriminated, and gave her husband as a spy. If you refuse to do it, you go through the other door in this room. There were two doors. And you will be sent to Goli Otok. Goli Otok, the meaning of the name is the naked island, because no vegetation grew up on it. It was one of the many concentrating camps of Marshal Tito. Very few people know about these camps and their brutality and their cruelty and the way people who were expelled and sent to one of these camps, they came back broken. And she had to make up her mind and to decide whether she is giving away the memory of her husband, or she collaborates, or she refused to collaborate with the UDBA. And part of the book is about these 3 minutes that she was given to decide
what choice to make. And she made her choice, and her choice was painful, sometimes ununderstandable, and yet it had a logic of its own, a logic of her own, of Eva's home. And we talked about this story for 20 years, and we argued about this story for 20 years. Her life story, her love to her dead husband, the way she worshipped him, these are parts of this book. But it all started with this phone call that suddenly brought into my life this character. As it happens, by the way, quite often in my job, in my profession, that people come and tell me their stories. Why do they do it? I'm not sure. Maybe they feel that if a writer gets its story and writes it, then there will be some eternity being given to this story. Maybe they feel that if the story is being written, then it exists and exists forever. I don't know. I like it. I like it when people come and tell me their stories. I don't know if in Portuguese my book, Someone to Run With, is translated. No, it's not translated. So I'll tell you a story. My editor. One day I was about to leave my home and to go to meet with. I almost entered my car, and suddenly a man approached me, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, do you know this dog?" Now, he was leading a dog on a leash, and I was never asked such a question. Do you know this dog? And I said, "No, I don't know. Why do you ask?" And he said, "Please have a second look, because I'm running after this dog for 4 hours from 8 in the morning." And I said, "Wow, chapeau, bravo that you are doing that. Why are you doing it?" And he said, "Well, you see, I believe that this dog will lead me to his owner." And I stunned by such an act of grace in my neighborhood. It's something quite rare. And I really adore you for putting all this effort. He said, "Ador shmedor, I work in the sanitation department in the municipality, and this is how we find the owners of lost dog. And believe me," he said, "if I find the owner, he will have to pay a huge fee for wasting my time." And I remember I entered my car and I sat, and I tell you, I felt like drops of honey from heaven falling on me, because I thought, what an idea. The locomotive of the story now will not be a human being, but will be a dog. You know, a dog that would pull behind it the man who will look for the owner of this dog. And I thought maybe the man will not be a man, but it will be a 16 years old young man or a boy. And the dog will not take it directly to his owner, because the owner is Tamar, and she is a 16 years old girl or young woman. And the boy will chase the dog, and the dog will not take him directly to the owner, because if it does that, I will have no book. It will end after one chapter. I want to have many chapters. And the dog will take him to different stations in Jerusalem, and in each station, there is some person who will tell him something about the owner of the dog. He will recognize, or she will recognize, that the dog belongs to this Tamar, because Tamar is a very poignant character, and it leaves a strong impression on everyone who knows her. But it becomes understood to the boy that she is running away from someone and also chasing someone else. And the more he tries to find who she was, and the more he speaks with people who knew her, he falls deeper and deeper in love with her, and he never saw her until he sees her, and then they meet for the first time. But when they meet, he is totally in love with her. He's boiling with love to her, and she doesn't know about him at all. She doesn't know he was chasing her. And all this story started from this meeting with the gentleman with the dog near my neighborhood.
To tell that this talk will be more or less an hour, and in the end we will have 10 minutes to questions that you may like to put. But I don't know if you want to tell something about this
particular book.
You see, I try to avoid it, but I will. I will.
But so I'll put you another question that will allow you to speak
Okay.
about this book. Because very often some critics signalize that in your books there is always a very important sense of family. But there are other books, or eventually, or maybe in the same books, that you have also strong characters as women, like
Aura.
Laura, like Eva. Would you speak about this? Or do you create these characters, or do you create your characters?
Well, you asked some questions together. I'll
Yes.
try to.
Feel free to.
This book, in Hebrew, it's To the End of the Land. Oh, I'm sorry. In Hebrew, it's a woman escaping the news. Is about Ora. Ora is a 50 years old Israeli woman who is living apart from her husband, and she has two sons. One of them his name is Autor, and Autor is 21 years old, and he is being sent to a military operation, and she drives him to the gathering point of his regiment, and she goes back home. And she has a very strong intuition that something horrible will happen to him. And she really starts to get crazy with activities, with small things that she does in order to distract her mind from what is going to befall on her. And you have to know that in Israel, the machinery of the notification of the falling of a son in the war is very efficient machinery. And people come, and when they got the final affirmation of the death of your beloved one, they will come and knock on your door at every hour of the day or of the night and throw the notification at your face. And she suddenly, it pierces her that for delivering bad news, it takes two, one to deliver and one to receive. And she starts to think, what if she is not there to receive the notification? What if they cannot find her? And immediately she's running away from home, hoping not to be located by the notifications, by the notifiers. And the story is about her journey through Israel and the talks that she has about her son with a man that joins her, a man who was very close to her in past years, and now he almost disappeared until she found him, and she forces him to come with her to her walking trip in half of Israel. And the heart of it is telling the story of the child, of this child who is 21, and of the whole family, and to show what does a war do to a family, to the thin, fragile tissue, fabric of the family, and how easily it is to torn totally this fabric, and how life in Israel, with all the violence that is inside us and around us, with all the fear for the future, with all the life that are being narrowed constantly by being exposed to so much violence that we exude, that we absorb. And what does it mean to live all your life, not only without peace, but also without a hope for peace? What kind of expertise one develops in order to survive better in such situation? What is the price of the paradox of the survivors that we are, we the Jewish people who are, throughout our history, we survived to live our life, and suddenly we live to survive only. all the big questions of our life as reflected in the life of one small, quite ordinary family, the family of Ora. I should add also that I started to write it when our second son, Uri, was joining the military after his brother Jonathan left the military after 3 years. And Uri was part of the second Lebanese war, as we call it, in 2006, and he was killed then. And to a greater part of writing the story, he helped me because he knew so much about the military, being a serving soldier. And he was very involved in the story. And each time he came to vacation from the army, he asked, okay, let's hear what you did now to your characters, in a very cynical way, ironic way. But I was unable to write in the years before he fell. I was unable to write the story because something blocked me all the time. And I didn't know what that was. And I felt that I'm unable to write the character of Ora. Ora is this woman, the Israeli 50 years old woman. And I felt that I had all the words, but I did not have the melody of the book. I was not really understanding Ora from within. And whenever I write about a character, he or she, I deeply need to be totally, to prevail totally in their inner spaces and to know everything about them, but to know them, like in the biblical term, and man knew his wife Eve. And I was unable to do it. And then since I felt that I'm going to lose this book, not being able to write it, I did something stupid, but it was quite reasonable for me at the time, and I wrote her a letter. I wrote Ora a letter. I just sat and wrote her a letter with a pen and a paper and an envelope on the side, not a mail. I thought a paper will be more efficient and personal and piercing. And I wrote there, "Dear Ora, why are you like that? Why don't you surrender to me?" And I must tell you that the moment I wrote, "Why don't you surrender to me?" it really pierced me again, how stupid I was, because it's not Ora who has to surrender to me. It is me who must surrender to her totally, to be totally exposed to her, to allow her to prevail in my inner spaces, so to say. And the moment I was able to do that, the moment I understood it or I felt it, there was the story. There was a story and there was the character of Ora. And she almost wrote herself, almost was able to lead me behind her and just to ask me not to interfere, to allow her to tell her story. And these moments in the process of writing are so sweet. The moment when suddenly the story is telling itself, and the moment when you feel that you know so much of the characters, of the plot, that it's about time to withdraw. Don't tell too much. Don't chew the food for your reader. Let the readers tell their story through your story. It's a very delicate question of balance between the need to talk, the wish to talk, and the decision of withdrawing, of leaving some spaces unformulated, unarticulated. So the reader will write the book with me. These are the books I like the most to read. And of course, when I write my stories, I try as much as I can to get to this point, very frail point, where suddenly the story starts to tell itself. And it's as I said, such a sweet moment, such rare moments. And well, yes, I think I told already too much.
When we were dining, in a certain moment, you said that talking with somebody about this book, in a certain point, you said that you didn't know if you could save the book, but this person answered you that it's the book will save you. Did it happen like this?
Yes, I was not sure I'm able to save the book after Uri fell. And then I think after this, in Judaism we have the 7 days of lamenting, a Shiva, which is an amazing idea. When you're losing someone who's close to you, you sit down, and people are coming to comfort you by just being with you an hour, 2 hours, talking about the person that died, and distracting your mind from the sharpness of the catastrophe that befell you. And after the 7 days, I went back to my book. And I did it because the book was one of the very few things that remained still possible in the life that became totally impossible, in the life that nothing could have been taken for granted, in even staying alive. But the need to keep the characters alive, to give them, to infuse into them anecdotes and biography and sense of humor and sexuality, all the things that make someone alive or feel like alive. I had to do it because if I did not do it, no one else will do it for me. No other writer will write my story. This story, when it's being written, is relevant only for me. It's so relevant that I'm willing to dedicate 5-6 years of my life to write it. And gradually, slowly, I started to feel that there is an air of life in what I'm doing. Not in the first days, not in the first weeks, but quite later, I started to feel that I'm in the right direction, and that I have in me the power to infuse all these qualities into my characters, which means that they exist in me, those qualities, those abilities. I cannot say it was easy. It was not easy, but I do feel that among the very few things that saved me, like my family, like some friends, like nature, being in nature is very comforting. Beside all that was the story, the fact that I was able to write the story, to go over the almost unbearable thought that I was writing this story for almost 3 years before it happened to me. And that in the end, I have a story, a book that in a way is a lament of the family, that as it's used to be before the catastrophe, and about all the complexities and all the layers and contradictory layers of living in Israel, of educating children for certain high ideas, and then you always think maybe by educating them towards such tenderness and fragility and tolerance of any other, I am not preparing them for life in the violent area of the Middle East. Many, many more questions that are revealed through the writing, through the reading of this book.
You mentioned now the Middle East, and I think I must ask you this. Isn't it tragic that now we can put now the very same questions that we could put 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago about what's happening in the Middle East?
Yes, and the repetition element is destructive because people feel that they are trapped, almost like in a time wrap, like that they cannot get out of a situation. And you very rightly use the word the tragic situation. It is a tragedy. It is a tragedy now. What started as a mistake and developed into a crime, I'm talking about the settlements that Israel created in the occupied territories of the Palestinians. What started as a mistake and continued as a crime became a tragedy for both peoples because they are trapped in a situation that is very hard to see how it will be solved. Very hard. The settlements were planted deliberately in places that will prevent any future viable peace between us, the Israelis, and the Palestinians. The terror of the Palestinians make the situation not easier. The situation becomes more and more extreme, and at the same time, more and more insoluble. And the average citizen of this drama, the Middle East drama, the more he or she feels that the situation is insoluble, they remove themselves from the situation. The situation becomes like a divine decree, something from heaven that we can do nothing in order to change it. And the two sides are being trapped in it. The citizens of this drama remove themselves from the conflict, but to the void that is being created between the reluctance of the Israelis and Palestinians to deal with it and the reality, that the violent, brutal reality, this void never remains empty because it's being filled immediately by elements who have a very fundamentalist, nationalist, racist agenda, and they are taking over and they are kidnapping us, the average reasonable Israeli and the average reasonable Palestinian. They are kidnapping us and our future and our children. And I tell you frankly, it's very hard to see a way out of the situation that was created.
Just to, I'm not insisting this, but I remember that one of your, maybe it was a turning point in your professional work when you wrote this Yellow Wing. You were much younger. You were a reporter now, at that time now, and as far as I can remember, you once said that. It was a huge surprise for many Israelis to read what you wrote about in your reportage, and even an editor of yours said something like this: we didn't know how much they hate us.
Yes, we didn't know how much they hate us. We didn't know what we are doing in order to make them hate us. I wrote it in 1988, many years ago, and I wrote it because I felt that what happens in the occupied territories is something that I stopped understanding, and I wanted to bear witness to what happens there. Maybe I should add that at that time I was the anchorman of the main news magazine in Israel, Kol Israel, the Voice of Israel, which uses a certain formal, deceptive language that was created in the governmental radio, was created not to tell the reality that we are part of, but to buffer between the citizen, the average citizen, and the reality. And I wrote a chapter in the Yellow Wing. I wrote a chapter about the laundry of the language, how in such situation, extreme situations of occupation, of terror, of fear, a certain language is being created, and it's a whitewashed language. It's neutralizing the contents of reality from what it describes. So I was making the news every morning between 6 and 8 and 7 and 8. A lot of bad news. I think that what I have broadcasted in 1 hour was enough for Denmark for a century. So much craziness and violence and extremity. And I had to use the official dictionary of the radio, the governmental radio, which I very rarely obeyed. And immediately after every broadcasting, I was called to my superiors and was scolded heavily and violently until in the end they just did the natural thing and fired me from my work in the radio. And this is how I deteriorated to literature. But in this story, the nucleus point for me is the language we use in order to describe a situation. Because usually it is so tempting, especially in situations that is threatening, to use this whitewashed language, to use a language that does not tell but rather hides. And I think what anyone who wants to be a witness to such situation must ask himself or herself whether he or she is using the authentic language or only a language that was suggested to him or sometimes imposed on him by the government, by the Supreme Court sometimes, by the media, by our fears and our suspicions? Or are you able to create a new language to describe the old story? Because the reaction was not only to my book, I think, the reaction in Israel. And there was, I just have to say, there was a very strong reaction. The reaction was not because of the facts that I was telling people. The facts were known to most people, more or less. But the way it was formulated, the way, I think, if I may say so, a writer wrote them. And a writer, as I see it, is someone who feels claustrophobic in words of other people. Just almost physical claustrophobic, strangling. And you have to break through this language and to breathe your own air, your verbal air. And the fact that a writer was going to the occupied territories and came back with the old story, but with new language that describes it, suddenly caught the Israelis and the Palestinians, by the way, who read the book, caught them in surprise because they did not have arguments against what I wrote. They had to work very hard in order to be able to forge a language that will answer the questions that I aroused in this book. I asked you when we had the dinner if writers in Portugal are involved politically, and you said that some of them do and some of them don't. In Israel, most writers do not relate to the situation in a literary way or do not take part in any literal activity. There are very few who do it, and I think I always think it's understandable because most people are afraid for the way the audience will accept them, because once you wrote even the word occupation, you pay a price for it in popularity, in money sometimes. Yet there are some people, and I'm very proud to be among them, who react to the situation. And I think it's a matter of personality. I know for myself, I take reality very seriously. And when I feel that the reality is being polluted, the way it is being polluted, as I explained it, I don't want to breathe this reality. Now, I want to stay in Israel. I want to be in Israel because I think that Israel, with all the problems and the faults, is still a miracle. Miracle is a religious term, and I'm a non-believer, totally non-believer, but I will say in a secular terminology, Israel is a miracle. Just think of what we have done there in the Middle East 3 years after the end of the Second World War and the Shoah. Shoah is the mass murdering of 6 million Jews. You look at this young country who created in no time culture and agriculture and industry, and not only industry, but the most developed high-tech in the world. And even this army this army that we are constantly criticizing is not only the army of the occupation, but it's also the thing that allows us to be there, because if we had not have an army to defend ourselves, we should not have lived there for 5 minutes, as I keep hearing from Arab colleagues. But army alone cannot be the answer to the complexity of our situation. And I will just say that, and by that we shall go back to literature.
Yes.
I do not believe that, or let's say, the Palestinians will not have a home if the Israeli will not feel confident at their home, and vice versa. If the Palestinians will not feel confident, Israel will not have a home. Both sides have to have a feeling of home, of being at the place that they were meant to be, and to start to develop normal relationship like between two neighbors. It was foreseeable 10 years ago. It was possible maybe 5 years ago. I'm not sure what is the situation right now. But this is something that I wish for them, the Palestinians, and I wish for myself, because I'll talk now only about us, because this is what I understand. Throughout history, always the Jews did not feel at home in the world, not as individuals, not as collective. Always the signs of dotted lines were marked around them, and they were easily uprooted from many realities and persecuted and demonized and whatever, genocide in the Shoah. And I want Israel to be a home. I want to be a place that I'll feel secured and confident, that I will not feel that others have claims on some of my rooms in my home. I want to have a place that I'll feel there is a future to my children and to my granddaughters. And Israel is yet not the home it was meant to be. Sometimes I feel it's more like a fortress than a home, and I wish it will be a home, and that we shall start to live normal life without the sword that is hanging above our heads for so many years. Is it possible? I was much more sure about it 5 or 10 years ago. Now I'm much less sure about that. But there's always literature.
Yes, this is a subject that could take us hours and hours, but let's go back to the books. I've been told that you have been writing now for children. Could you share with us your experience?
I like to write for children, and each time when I finish a novel, I take a break, so to say, and I write a book for children. And I like also not only writing for children, but I think about the moments when the parent puts the child to bed to sleep. And it's a very special moment in the day and in the life of the young baby, the young child, because night approaches, and night is dreams and nightmares, and 3 years old or 4-year-old not always understand why mama or papa cannot enter the bed dream and rescue the child from it. And night means the shadows on the wall sometimes, and the sleeve of a shirt can look like a trunk of an elephant. And the boy or the girl lies in their bed, and they keep hearing the other members of the family doing their businesses, and suddenly maybe they got a glimpse of a guess of how life was without them before they arrived. I don't say that they understand it in such words, but they just have this tickle of the mind, of the consciousness of how life was before they came to this family. And I always feel that the stories for children allows or give legitimacy to some qualities that otherwise are not expressed in the everyday life of the family, like thought about absurdity, or thought about humor, or all kind of words that maybe are not part of the vocabulary of this family. And in my book, I always use 1 or 2 words that will be a little unusual for a child, that he will have to stretch his toes in order to understand. I always remember when my father used to read to me good night stories, and there were some familiar words, and he said, do you want to know what it means? And I said, no. I like the fact that it was hanging in the air like, exotic, realistic crumbs of reality that I do not understand. And if the parent allows himself to enter this bubble of the good night story, to enter it also almost as a child from his side, then there can be a meeting of these two, a meeting without tension, without the usual bargaining that exists between children and their parents. You said you will do this, you will clean your room, you will wash your ears, and you said you will buy me this or that. And suddenly there is a moment in this bubble of the good night story that everything is protected from the disagreement that exists between the community of the grown-ups and the community of the children. And if the parents allow himself or herself to enter it bereft of everything he feels and of the nervousness of the day and all the conflicts that I've described, then there is a chance that both child and parent will meet in another way in the background of the good night story. And the parents, I remember myself looking at the face of my father, reading to me, and my father was and is quite an authoritative person. But then there was a glimpse of childhood and childness in his expression. And always I think of how insecure the child is. I remember when our son, Jonathan, when he was 3 years old, and I put him to bed and I said, good night, and the usual ceremonies and rites of putting a child asleep. He wants to drink something, he wants to pee, he wants me to stay for another story, or my wife to sing for him another lullaby. And one night I put him to bed and I said, Jonathan, tonight is the longest night of the year. It was the 21st of December. And I kissed him goodbye and went to do my business. And I think at 5 a.m, he burst into our room and he was all sweat and excited. And he said, Daddy, Mommy, it's over. This night is over. Now, you are laughing because all of us, we are congealed children. We don't think about it anymore. But he was a child, and for him, it was not taken for granted that the sun will rise tomorrow. Maybe it will not rise tomorrow. He does not have the accumulated experience. Maybe something new will happen. And when I write for children, I wrote until now, I think, 19 books for children. I aim into this point where you don't know if the sun will rise again. That there is always this mystery of what's really going to happen tomorrow or in the new day that approaches us.
Let's imagine that tomorrow
the sun will not rise.
No, that tomorrow you will begin a new novel. Would you describe us? Have you any routines? What's your process of writing?
I write every day.
You wake up early, very early. I understood.
We wake up very early. We wake up at 5:45 every morning, and we have a walk near the place where we live of 3 or 4 kilometers. And then we come back home with my wife, Michal, who is here. And the day begins. And I write as much as I can. I mean, until 1 o'clock, and then sometime in the afternoon. And I write many, many versions, version after a version after a version, because only through these versions I start to get closer and closer to my story. So usually it takes me time to understand not only what I'm writing, but why am I writing it? Why it has to be me who writes this story. And usually it's really a clash sometimes, because I said I do not feel that this story is relevant for me. And then slowly, the more I expose myself to the potential suggestions, so to say, of the story, I understand that not only it is relevant for me, but it's crucial for my well-being and sometimes for my being. and the accumulation of characters and the way characters are being created. Because I can never start writing a story unless I understand the physicality of the character. I must understand everything. How does he look and how she looks and how they eat and how they walk, and if they're doing all kind of gesture in their hands while they're talking, and how curly is their head, and how they make love and how they eat. All the physical things I need to know. It's like an anchor being rooted in the sand. So I start to pull myself together, pull myself towards it. I remember when I was writing Someone to Run With, that is not translated.
It will be.
Yeah. I struggled with it for something like half a year because I did not have the physicality of Tamar, of the main female character of the book. And again, there were many words around her, and I knew many words, but I did not have her the way I want to have her. And then one day I entered the mall in our neighborhood, and there was in the store for computers, I need to have something there. And I saw a young woman, a girl, she looked like 15 or 16. I saw her from here. I was here, I'm the camera, and I saw this part, this jaw of her, and there was a mixture of tenderness and toughness in this part of the face, and she was tender and tough, both simultaneously. In all her being, there was something of defiance and yet of neediness. And I looked at her and I knew, this is Tamar, exactly this is what I need. And I ran out of the store. I didn't want to be influenced by her voice, for example, because her voice I had from another girl. But I just didn't have her physicality, and suddenly I had her. So, is it an answer?
Do you have any routines? Do you have any superstitions? Do you write on computer? Do you handwriting? What's your process of writing?
I don't have any superstitions. I mean, my iguana can live alone on my table for years. It doesn't interest. I just want to have time to write. That's my only superstition. And as I said, I write version after version after version because this is how I understand my story. And Are
you a slow writer?
I consider myself a slow writer, even though I wrote quite many books, but very slowly they were written. One you asked for ceremonies. It's not really a ceremony because it's something essential, but I do it in the end of writing of every book. I stand up and reading it, the whole book out loud. Why do I do it? Because I feel standing creates another distance between me and the story. And I need this distance at this stage of the writing because now it gets closer and closer to the eyes of readers, of indifferent readers, and they read it for the first time and they are not biased by anything, hopefully. But also when I read it out loud, so many mistakes of the book surface. So many mistakes. This is the advice that I always give young writers. Just read out loud and you will see how it is. You know that Flaubert, the great genius writer Flaubert, used to stand at his window and to shout the book to the great sorrow of his neighbors. I'm much more friendly to my neighbors. And he used to make the brothers Goncourt sit in front of him for 6, 7, 9 hours and to read them out loud, every word he wrote. Because you see, when you do it, there is also a returning echo from the word, and you get a glimpse of how it will be read by other people. So, yeah.
When you finished the book, did you ever put yourself this question? Why did I have the need to write this book?
When I finish the book, I already know why did I have to write this book. It's very clear to me, and then this means that I'm very, very near the ending of the book. Usually when I write, by the way, I do not allow myself to know the ending of the book. I want to wait until I am prepared for it. And sometimes I can wait for a year before I will decide who will kill whom in the situation, and who will make this or other choice, who will die, mama or papa, like in the book A Horse Walks into a Bar.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you remember your very first contact with literature?
Yes, actually. I think I was 4 years old and I was in a kindergarten, and the kindergarten nurse suddenly had something urgent that she had to do and to leave the kindergarten. And there was a little rock in the middle of the lawn of the kindergarten, and she said, she put me on this rock and she gathered the children around me and she said, now David will read you a story, will tell you a story. I didn't know to read, will tell you a story. And she ran away. She came back later, some years later. But but suddenly I found myself in this situation that I have to invent a story. And I must say, it gave me a lot of pleasure.
Mm. Which authors made more impact on you or more influenced you?
Many writers. And I mean, there were writers who really influenced me and probably formulated to me things that I was unable to formulate otherwise. For example, a Jewish Polish writer named Bruno Schulz, I don't know if you know him, but if what comes out of this meeting is that tomorrow or on Monday you are all run to this bookstore and buy books of Bruno Schulz, I will feel my work has been done. He's a genius, and I will not talk a lot about him, but he really, because of him, I wrote a book called Sea Under Love, and it's a book about how life is possible after the Shoah, because he was murdered in the Shoah, and I think people who read it were able to understand that the killing of every human being is the destruction of a whole universal culture. Every human being, every one human being is a whole universal culture. Another writer is called, his nickname is Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem is a Jewish Yiddish writer who lived in Galicia in the turn of the 20th century. He was a humorist, a genius humorist, and he described the life of the Jews who did not have a state by then in the small shtetl, in the small townlets and villages in Galicia, in East Europe. And it's a story that he wrote stories for grown-ups, but I read him when I was 8 years old because one day my father came to me, to my room, and he said, take it, David, and he handed me a book. This is how it used to be over there. My father came from such a little townlet in Galicia, from the city of Dinov. Nobody from Dinov here. Every time I tell this story,
Galicia, not in Spain.
Galicia, not in Spain, yes, but
in Israel.
Yeah. And I understood. I understood in an intuition that he's giving me his childhood. He never spoke about his childhood, but in this book was his childhood. And I started to read it and I was swept by it. I was taken because there was a reality that was so strange and bizarre, the reality of the Jews among the non-Jews in the small shtetl, in the small townlets and villages. And I was sure that this reality exists simultaneously to my existence in Israel in 60 or 61. And I think it was like a child today reading for the first time Harry Potter, which I know is quite relevant for this story, that maybe she was influenced by it or not, but the story exists. Because suddenly as a child, I discovered the whole world with a whole system of values, of manners, of a language. I remember even the pages were marked not with numbers, digits, but with letters. And it was like the Bible or the Mishnah, and I was sure it's a kind of a holy book that my father gives me and I will maybe give to my children at their turn. And it was my world for something like a year. I read everything that Shalom Aleichem has written. Most of it were for grown-ups. I don't know what I could have made back then from the stories about the life of the Jews persecuted by the non-Jews. But as I said, it was the childhood of my father, so it was irresistible for me. And I read it and I read it. And I remember that one day there was a radio competition in Israel about this Shalom Aleichem. And I came to my parents and I said, well, they are making auditions for people who want to take part in this competition. Yes, said my father. And I said, I want to be auditioned. And he said, you are 9 years old, you are a child, they will make fun of you. I said, but I won't. And said, no, it's nonsense, forget about it. So I went and bought for the first time in my life a postcard and sent it to the authorities of the radio, telling them that I want to be auditioned. Sure enough, a week later came a letter, we are talking about 62 or something like that, a letter inviting me to be auditioned. Now, a letter from the governmental radio was as if God himself looked at my father and told him, I want your son, your only one, I want him to be auditioned. They really almost fainted. And my father took me to be auditioned in studio number 3. I remember it very well. And there was a battery of experts of Shalom Aleichem and professors and literary critics. And they started to interrogate me. And I had, I don't have it anymore, the very fresh, vital memory of a child of the age of 9. So I was able to answer all of their questions. And they became more and more pressured and upset because they said it's a very uneducational idea that a child will win a huge sum of money if he wins this competition. The huge sum of money was something like $200, but we are talking about Israel, 1962, very ascetic, very limited in a way. So they offered me an offer I couldn't refuse, that I will sit in the studio in the live broadcasting of the competition, and whenever one of the competitors will not know the answer, they will turn to me. And so they did, and suddenly some people from the radio understood that they have here a child that can help them in all kinds of ways, and they asked me if I want to do programs with poets and with theater actors and with politicians, and I said, yes, why not? And armed with my mother, who drove with me to all these places, I went and I spoke with all these important people. Some of them were very important because they were football players and they interested me more than the others. And this is how I started to work in the Israeli radio from the age of 9 until I was fired at the age of 35 because of the Yellow Wind that I wrote.
Okay, just few questions, brief questions to finish it. We are talking here in English, but you don't write in English.
No.
You write in Hebrew. What's the challenge contained in this? Or what are the difficulties? What can you say about this of writing in Hebrew?
I write in Hebrew, as Valdemar said. I write in Hebrew. You are very generous to assume that I can write in English. I cannot. I can write only in Hebrew. It's not a neutral fact. Of course, the language that a writer uses, that every human being is using, cannot be irrelevant thing. But for a writer, someone whose job and whose instruments is the language, it is important for me to know that I'm writing in a language that I write with or in a language that counts back something like 4,000 years. And so much history and psychology and ideals are embedded in this language. They have been accumulated over so much time. I sometimes think that had Abraham, the patriarch, Avraham Avinu, was to take part in our dinner table, he probably would have been able to understand 50% of the language of my 7-year-old granddaughter, which is an enormous sense of sequence of culture, sequence of language. And maybe you know that the Hebrew was dormant for 1800 years. It was not a spoken language. It was used only for holy rites and for all kind of religious ceremonies and for holidays. But people did not speak with each other, did not converse in Hebrew. So it means that there was not terminology of merchandising. People did not gossip in Hebrew. People did not use the slang of military in Hebrew. People did not make love in Hebrew. And suddenly came this strange person, Eliezer ben Yehuda, from Galicia, and he came to the land of Israel before the state of Israel was created. And he decided that he will kiss the dormant beauty and bring it back to life. And he created a paper, a daily paper in Hebrew, only in Hebrew, can you imagine? And a dictionary in Hebrew. And he insisted on the Hebrew, and even in the marital agreement with his wife, he made it a condition that if they bear a child, they will speak only Hebrew to him. Now they had a child, they bore a child, they called him Itamar, it's a beautiful name. And they spoke only Hebrew to him, and he answered. And I think sometimes about his solitude, to be the only child on earth who speak Hebrew. There were no other children to play with around him. He was so isolated, and later he became a very famous journalist in Hebrew. So it is a blessing for me to write in Hebrew. I will just add that I take part for the last 32 years or 31 years in a small group, very small, we are only 3, of people who are doing what the Jews used to do throughout history, which is to read the Bible with magnifying glass. And we are having this group, and we study the Bible every week, reading the text with magnifying glass, finding a lot of echoes and association in the stories of the Bible. And the Bible is really the greatest storyteller. And you do not have to be religious, and you do not have to be a Jew in order to understand, to appreciate it. I think it gives my writing the layer of the ancient Hebrew. But even the ancient Hebrew echoes today in the most updated slang of Israel. And what I love about the Hebrew, that all the different layers of this language, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the 19th century literature, the 21st century, all these are playing at the same time in almost everything that is being written in the Hebrew. Maybe here I'm being swept away a little, but it is a language that is relevant for so many people because of what it echoes, because of the memories and sometimes the tragedies that accompanied these people.
Well, okay, to finish, rather to ask you to name the book that you prefer.
I will not answer.
Okay. So I would prefer to listen you to speak about the book that most challenged you.
The most challenging
book of your books.
Well, a book that's called Falling Out of Time that I wrote after the falling of my son.
This one. No.
Not this one.
No.
Ah.
That one.
And it's a book that I had to write because I felt that no one will write the book that I need to read. And it's a book that most of it is poetry. It's not prose. Why poetry? I don't know. My wife, Michal, said poetry is the closest to silence. And that's what I need. I needed silence at that time, but then silence was not enough. I needed words because I felt that if I don't have words, then the tunnel between me and the memory of my son would be filled with more and more forgetfulness and distraction and escapism. And I'm not good at escapism. And I wanted to write about what had happened, and I wanted to be able to write about the most further point in which one can be with someone who died on him and still wanting to go back to life. Because this book, Falling Out of Time, taught me something. It taught me that as a non-believer, a fanatic non-believer as I am, there is only one place in which I can experience and explore simultaneously the darkness and the nothingness of the loss, especially with the same time to feel the fullness of life and vitality of life and the plenty of life. There is only one place in the human being that you can feel both of them simultaneously, and this is the place of the art, of writing prose or poetry, of painting, of making movies, theater, of course, making movies. These are our religion, so to say, and this is why we go to bookstores, by the way, if you want me to end.
Go back to the
to go
beginning
back
of
for the
all-
first question. This is why we go to bookstores, to be surrounded by these qualities of being together simultaneously in the two most extreme levels of mankind, of human beings.
Well, David Grossman, thank you very much. Agora é todo vosso, para poderem fazer algumas perguntas.
Thank you. תודה רבה.
Sim.
Okay.
Yes.
Now it's better, I believe. Shalom, David, and Toda Rabba for having you here. So, to break the ice, just because I saw a few of your lectures, and they all go for the Orthodox questions and kind of more moral questions. And I saw that you released a bunch of videos, or in this case, films, adapted to the books. The question here is, I met a few Israelis, and I'm a bit nervous, sorry, to talk to everyone. I met a few Israelis, and the perspective about like the life in Israel, it's a bit different. And I followed the Shtisel, I don't know if you know it, Israeli web series. And due to this book, like Till the End of the Earth, where you put another perspective of the Israeli eyes on the daily life that I believe like most of the Europeans don't know, did you ever thought about making kind of a series or a Netflix series or whatever with that book that you can brought this reality on the eyes of most of the Europeans? Was clear, but yeah.
No, the introduction went one way and then the question went the other way. So it takes me time to collect the herd. No, I don't think about writing for Netflix. I enjoy seeing some productions of Netflix, not all of them, but some of them. And I don't think I should write movies. I should write books. I had one experience in writing a play about 9 children, 3 and 4 years old, and they are alone in the kindergarten without the nurse. For 2 days, they are talking with each other, and all the relationship are exposed, and the places where suddenly the child says something that is so much more mature than his age that you understand that he quotes something he overheard at his home. And the way they discover language and the way they discover their sexuality and the way they discover the complexity of the relationship at home and what their parents are really doing or really meaning to do. But rather than that, life is short and one has to do what one knows more to do. And I think that I should write stories.
Mais alguém? Eu peço só que sejam muito concretos nas perguntas.
I will try. So as a disclaimer, I would just say that we share the same mother tongue and motherland. And I would like to say that when someone is interested in Israel and want to come to visit Israel, many times I said, just read one Grossman book before. And it's funny that you said about the voice of Israel, as I find it many times that this is what helps me to introduce Israel to others.
Thank you.
We lost it. Not always those people come to Israel after. I think that's but it's not because of you. I think that there is some intensity that is very related to Israel, and from this intensity, I can really understand how you, in a sense, grew up, and your books are full of those. I'm thinking about the horse in the bar, and I'm thinking about under love, whatever that in English, and I think how deep are those characters, and in the same time, I'm looking at you. There is something very good boy about you. I mean, you are, I would dare to say, even a nerd in a sense.
I accept it happily. Yeah.
And again, I'm thinking about not a gap, but about, because you said just a moment ago that you don't like to escape, you are not like this escapism. And yet I'm thinking about this gap between those characters that are taking, almost like Paul Auster's books, like running into the end of the world with their experiments about emotions, about being exposed, about vulnerability, and about your life. And I'm thinking another sentence, just sorry not to be so long, that I remember that in one of your books, I think you said about Kundera, that he says that some words or some feelings can be taught or can be discovered only by words. A person that don't know what is like to be avoided maybe will not have that feeling in his heart. And again, I'm coming back to the question, or not even a question, just like I'm giving you the microphone, just to give maybe a few words about yourself, finding and discovering yourself in this planet, in this plan, in this universe, through those characters. And I don't know if you want to spare a few words about that.
Again, 3 questions.
Yeah, I mean, very sharp of you, but take the microphone. I don't know, like this.
Yes, I will take the microphone. No, don't worry. No, I think that all your questions, they say that that things are not always as they look, or as they look. Also, my own looks, and that they are. If I take the quotation of Kundera, I will reverse it and say that there are many people whom we should not provide words to, but allow them to be accumulated from what we do not say. I said that I'm writing every day between 8 and 1, and then I go back home, and between 4 and 7, so to say, I erase almost half of what I wrote because I felt I said too much. And there is such a power to erasing the things you have written. And suddenly I feel that the whole text is being upgraded. Whenever I eliminate something, the story and the text is being upgraded. And it creates in the reader what I described before, the need to complete what was not told, the need to project upon the void the soul and the character of the reader. And you asked about me, and again, if I answer it, I will not give you the suggestion or the option to tell the story that you have upon me, and I will not ruin your image, because I like also this part of me.
Mais alguma pergunta? Aqui.
Hi.
Michel?
May I? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I start to say I speak pretty bad English, so I'm sorry to all because maybe I'm not expressed correctly enough. So I have a lot of questions, but I know we don't have time. I'm wondering, in the last times, I must say before, just when I wrote a few of your books, and as a man who lost a child or a son in a conflict, I suppose for some reason, I don't know why, I will meet a man not so committed with his country, but I see a different kind of way in a surprisingly way. So I have maybe 3 questions, pretty direct. My first question is how because I was thinking about this in maybe in 5 years from now. I'm not asking about your hometown, because we all know is Israel. So my question is, if you close your eyes, how you explain your homeland? Not hometown, but homeland. I have one more question, because it's my curiosity. We all know you hate Benjamin Netanyahu. So
I don't hate him. I disagree with everything he does. But
okay. So with the coalition government and with Bennett far away from the game, you think Lapid is doing a better job now? And I have not exactly a question. I'm sorry if I was taking too long. This is the first book I read from you.
Which book is that? I cannot see.
Is the blue one?
Sian de Love, okay.
Yes. It's I not say this as often. Is the most difficult book I ever read in my life. Is the one who's take me most time to read. And you sent us to some craziness world, and in the end, and I thought you speak about from this in the end sentence of the book, which is pretty simple. So my question is, you try to send us to all this insane world and universe to in the end tell us the war is like you want to try to send us to a world of craziness in the world and in the evil, and in the end you reveal the message to us. I don't know if it was clear.
Thank you for your questions. Because the hour is quite late and people start to move impatiently on their chairs, I will just answer the very ending of your three questions. And this is about Sea Under Love, which I said before. It's a book about how life is possible after everything we know about the cruelty of mankind. And I wrote it because I felt that I cannot continue my life as an Israeli, as a Jew, as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a writer, unless I try to live my unlived life over there in the time of the Shoah, both as a victim and as a murderer. It was very important for me to understand, to explore how can it be that people get to this level of atrocity. What is the process? What are the steps needed and taken in order to make yourself a mass murderer? And I think that almost in every book that I've written, it's the same struggle between an individual and some outer arbitrariness that threatens this individual. It can be the arbitrariness. Do you want to translate the word? I don't know. Arbitrariness? Yeah, sure, yeah. It can be the arbitrariness of military occupation. It can be the arbitrariness of the body on our soul, the way the body sculptures the soul, and vice versa. It can be the arbitrariness of death. It can be the arbitrariness of the Nazi way of thinking. And I found out something unexpected, that, of course, if I write about all these arbitrariness, I will not change the world, I will not make the human being immortal, I will not stop the military occupation. But something in the way I'm standing in front of this arbitrariness will change. I will not be stuck in a situation of helplessness and hopelessness as I was before I started to write this book. I will stop being a victim. And for me, not to be a victim, being a Jew, being the person I am, to not be a victim to anything is maybe the most important wish that I have. And every book that I've written is a kind of a cry out, firstly to myself, saying, do something, do not accept the situation that is imposed on you. Do not collaborate with evil, do not collaborate with the inability to act. Stop being a victim. Yeah. Thank you very much. You are very kind. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.